In this video for the Terra Firma Cowl knit along, we are going to talk about how to evaluate the swatch that you've created. Now that you've knit your swatch, weighed it so that you have the grams information for the calculator, and washed it however you're going to wash the final piece, whether that's throwing it in a wash machine or wet blocking it and stretching out the lace so you can see the eyelets, or not blocking it at all, we can evaluate your swatch and get a feel for how that's going to look in the final cowl. Some of the considerations I take into account when I'm evaluating my swatch are fabric quality, yarn choice, and size. So first up is fabric quality. I asked myself, how do I like this fabric? So here I have 3 swatches. I've got one I purposefully knit too small. I have the gauge swatch, and I have one that I purposefully knit very large. For pattern gauge, the first thing that I look at is how is the fabric in terms of stiffness? So is the fabric a nice drape? If I hold it over my finger, does it fold over nicely? Because it's going to do something similar on my neck. Does it move around? Like, how does it feel in my hands? Or is it too stiff? So for this one, I knit at a denser gauge, and you can see it doesn't quite drape as nicely over my finger as the gauge swatch does. You can see how it's not really moving, it's not doing a whole lot in terms of that beautiful sort of wave in the wind effect. And then on my too large swatch, it's almost too flimsy. There's nothing there. There's not really a whole lot of structure. If I drape it over my finger, it completely comes together. So there's no structure, there's nothing that's going to help it hold up in any way, shape, or form when this is around my neck. Another thing I look at when I'm considering fabric quality is how condensed or see-through is the fabric. So for this one, it's so loose I can actually poke my finger through it, so that's not going to be super warm on my neck. On the super small swatch, I can't see through it at all, and in fact these lace holes are barely even visible. In the gauge swatch, it's a nice balance. I can't quite poke my finger through, and I can also see the lace work well. The next thing I consider when evaluating my swatch is my yarn choice. Is the yarn texture and color playing nicely with the stitch pattern? Can I see the stitch pattern if that was my goal of choosing this yarn? Is it working up to a desired softness? How does it feel on my hands, on my neck? And is it looking good after washing? Since this was a superwash wool, it held up really well. It relaxed a little bit after washing, and I think it looks really good. Here's a couple of other swatches that I did when I was evaluating what yarn I wanted to use for this design. So this is 100% alpaca yarn, and I determined that the heathery look is really beautiful, but once I had it worked up, the texture kind of gets lost in the halo that the alpaca has after it was washed. It also is way more drapey than wool, and that's just not something that I was going for in this particular design. Here's another example. In this one I used Knit Picks Paragon, which is a pretty tightly plied yarn, you can see over my finger here. And when I got it knit up and blocked, it's a really beautiful yarn, but it wasn't quite showing off the stitch patterns in the way that I wanted. On the seed stitch, it almost made it too busy, where I didn't feel like I was getting a good sense of the stitch pattern. And on the leaf, I felt like the texture in the plies was taking away from the stockinette. So once you swatch, you can make those choices for yourself. So those are a few examples of how I evaluate the yarn choice. And then the last thing that I consider when I am evaluating my swatch is the size. So the gauge swatch here is a size that I like, and it matches up with the final pattern. This one is larger, and this one is smaller. I can use these to compare. While it doesn't look like the size is that big of a difference, it does affect the size of the finished piece considerably. So if your swatch is like this and you like the fabric, your cowl is going to be narrower than the cowl pattern. At that point, you can try using the modification instructions to extend the seed stitch lace if you want it wider, or you can use a larger yarn or larger needle size. If it's too wide for your liking, you can try using a smaller yarn or a smaller needle size to help bring that back into alignment. And if it's too long or short, which in the swatch is going to be indicated by the height, you can try using the modification instructions to add or remove 20 row repeats before grafting. Ultimately, evaluating your swatch is all about whether you love it or hate it, and that is a truly personal decision. When you're knitting a project, you are the artist. I may have set out guidelines in the pattern, but you truly have control. You get to decide and make this cowl whatever you want it to be. In the next video, we'll talk about how you can estimate size and yarn based on your swatch, and I'll introduce you to the handy dandy calculator that I've included for this knit along.